A final topic that interests me for my future dissertation is looking at the presidency of Ronald Reagan. I want to make the argument that he was a successful president by pointing out to the way that his actions led to the end of the Cold War and the collapse of the Soviet Union. According to Alan Dobson, President Reagan's strategy to accelerate the demise of the Soviet Union consisted of five pillars: 1. Economic; 2. Political; 3. Military; 4. Ideological; and 5. Moral. The strategies that the Reagan administration implemented were directed toward the eventual destruction, without war, of the Soviet Empire. Another point that the article makes was the aggressive propaganda of the Roman Catholic Church. The collapse of the Soviet Union really involved three actors: 1. Ronald Reagan; 2. Pope John Paul II of the Catholic Church; and 3. Margaret Thatcher, Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. Any serious discussion about the end of the Cold War has to deal with these three individuals. Reagan thought that the Soviets had serious economic problems and their grip on their empire, particularly Poland, was slipping. His conversations with Pope John Paul II in 1982 and further exchanges with the Vatican thereafter made clear his convictions. Reagan intended to renew America, reinvigorate the Western alliance, and challenge the Soviets more effectively. The second academic journal article is by Matthew Hall. It argues that by the 1980s, the governing elite had damaged American identity. All the problems of modern society has stemmed from the Supreme Court decisions of the 1960s that had banned school-sponsored prayer and Bible reading. The nation was now on a trajectory towards abortion and gay rights. The article explores conservatives, particularly Southern Baptists, who represented part of America's evangelical group. They tied America's moral strength to its military strength. With the challenge of communistic atheism, there was a need for a more aggressive foreign policy that was not only reasonable but morally necessary. No one was better at understanding this need than Ronald Reagan. His use of language was sometimes provocative and incendiary, as when he called the Soviet Union an evil empire that must be defeated at all costs. He constantly reminded the nation of its fight against global communism. According to the article, conservative Southern Baptists backed Ronald Reagan and his administration's foreign policy decisions. After all, global communism was a force that was directly hostile not only to Christianity, but also to global justice and biblical commands. As a result, conservatives increasingly lent their support to Reagan's defense policies. The final academic journal article is by Marie Gate. The article argues that Vatican-American relations were particularly close during the presidency of Ronald Reagan and the pontificate of John Paul II. During the Cold War, the United States served the role of a moral and religious force in the world, with its ideological struggle with the Soviet Union. The support from the Vatican was especially valuable since very few other religions could boast a visible leader as the Pope. In its global fight against communism, the United States needed to secure Vatican support, at least publicly, for its foreign policy decisions. The Pope well understood the suffering and persecution inflicted on Catholics under the Soviet regime. He felt no other nation but the United States could protect Western Europe from Soviet expansion. The Pope was unmistakably hostile to communism after living under a communist regime. His demand was for unadulterated religious liberty. Because of the shared anti-communist feelings, the Reagan administration and the Vatican would be closely associated in this later stage of the Cold War. The Reagan administration made concerted efforts to secure public Vatican endorsement for its policies. To the United States, Vatican support was seen as an important token of morality for its Cold War foreign policy decisions. These three articles are sourced from many academic journals and many books. Far too many to list. Again, the goal in my research is to show that Ronald Reagan was the quintessential successful president. The way that he maneuvered through the Cold War and its eventual end shows this. Reagan didn't simply want to contain communism, he wanted to push back, he wanted to make it recede and to collapse under its own weight.